Hello there, people of the internet. So the rain is coming down outside quite a bit, and I can't go to the gun range right now. And I find myself on rainy days basically wishing that I had something to do to be productive. Well, I came up with a good idea. I have a massive variety of different cartridges in stock, obviously, because I'm a surplus gun collector and I have a lot of firearms from all around the world. And as a result, I have a lot of different types of ammunition. So I figured I'd go ahead and I'd start breaking out some of these different types of ammunition, start talking about the various different kinds of applications, perhaps, the history behind said projectiles slash cartridges, the different kinds of projectiles that there are for each individual kind of cartridge, etc., etc. I thought that this right here might be a fun little series to have on the channel just because I have such a variety of different kinds of ammunition. I'm going to go ahead and start off with like the ones that people know, and then as time goes on we're going to really get into some obscure calibers. So I don't expect this video to get a lot of views just because basically everybody has made some sort of cartridge profile on the 9mm. So this right here is probably the most popular cartridge here in the United States, let alone, in the entire world. There are some countries with restrictions as to what civilian ownership can be, and if you have some sort of military cartridge, well, the civilians can't own any sort of military cartridge, which the 9mm Luger, Parabellum, 9x19, whatever it is you want to call it, it very much is a military cartridge, and it has been for like over 100 years at this point. So the 9mm nowadays is so ridiculously popular because it's just such a good universal cartridge. There's a lot of different cartridges out there that have been around for just as long as the 9mm, but the 9mm seems to stand on top because it just has such a perfect balance between accuracy, power, concealability, compact nature. They're not very heavy cartridges, but boy, can they pack a punch whenever you get yourself a proper load. I have these two cartridges on the wrong box. There we go. I knew something was off there. They're just a good, all-around, powerful enough cartridge that can be shoved into a double-stack magazine. You can get yourself quite a bit of capacity in a small package with these things. And they are not necessarily the most powerful cartridge out there, but between the modern projectiles and modern manufacturing procedures that we do on the 9mm ammunition of today, they can definitely pack enough of a punch to handle whatever it is that you're wanting to handle. They can definitely put down quite a bit of ballistic force onto target. Not only that, but between the different kinds of projectiles that we have nowadays and just the very fine tuning that goes into the ballistic performance, they are now much, much more accurate than they used to be, back whenever they were invented. So before we talk about the 9mm, let's talk about where it actually came from. The 9mm is kind of an attempt to make a smaller sort of anemic round much more powerful. The 7.65 round that was used in the C96 Mausers way back in the day, those were a little bit on the anemic side, and a lot of people that use these cartridges, they liked them, but comparing it to the cartridges that were around at the time period of the late 1800s, there weren't exactly a lot of options, and that's one of the main reasons why people liked it. They wanted to adopt some sort of stronger, more powerful round with their new Luger pistols, which is the handgun that came after the C96 for military adoptions, not just in the German military, but around the world. So essentially, what they did was they took that 7.65 cartridge and they increased the diameter of the bullet to be almost, not exact, but almost a straight wall cartridge versus the bottleneck cartridge that 7.65 was. It came out to roughly 9mm diameter. Wanted to keep the parts interchangeable between the new cartridge and the original parent cartridge, besides the barrel, of course. So all the dimensions besides the actual length of the case itself is the same as the 7.65 cartridge that this right here replaced. However, in an attempt to keep the actual length of the entire cartridge itself, not just the cartridge case, but the entire cartridge itself, they wanted to keep the lengths the same. This way they could use like the same magazine, same mag well, same frame, same grip, same everything in the handguns that they were using. So they did have to shorten the length of the case itself. I believe the 7.65 was 7.65 by 21, and the 9mm is 9 by 19. However, the length of both cartridges in general is going to be exactly the same. Now, with modern loadings and whatnot, of course, you're going to have different sizes of 9mm nowadays. We're talking back whenever these things were originally designed. So I think that the 9mm, this is just like me talking out of speculation here, but I think the 9mm is as popular as it is because the 9mm Lugers were as popular as they were. The Luger was well, not the first, but one of the first real commercial successful semi-automatic handguns out there on the market. And a lot of people adopted the 9mm Luger as opposed to like the 7.65 Lugers, the 30 caliber Lugers, just because the 9mm was a much more potent round than the 7.65 was. Not only that, but they're roughly the same size, roughly the same weight. If you can pack more of a punch and still have the same capacity, why would you not go with the larger cartridge? A lot of people adopted 9mm Lugers over there in Europe, and whenever I say a lot of people, I mean a staggering amount of people adopted the 9mm Luger to the point to where it's still popular today. If you show somebody who's not all that gun oriented, if you show somebody a Luger, odds are they're going to recognize it. Now, I do not have a Luger with me, but I do have a P38/P1. This right here was the predecessor to the Luger, not the predecessor, we're going to call it the sequel, because I can't think of the actual term right now. This right here was the sequel to the Luger. This right here is what the German military made to replace the Luger, because the Luger was extremely expensive to make. It required a lot of very fine tuning, whereas this right here was significantly cheaper. It still chambers the same 9mm cartridge, and these right here were very popular handguns basically all the way up until, hell, after the Second World War. After the Second World War, they were redesignated to the P1 versus the P38, but they're essentially the same handgun. These were extremely popular at the time. Due to various countries wanting to keep cartridge compatibility between their submachine guns and their handguns, a lot of submachine guns were also chambered in the 9mm Parabellum round, which I think also really attributes to the massive popularity behind 9mm. After the war, the markets of basically all of your countries that were allowed to own firearms at the time were just absolutely flooded with 9mm firearms, and people just, they liked it, because whenever you compare a 9mm to some of the other cartridges that were available at the time, with how popular 9mm was, because of the influx of all this military hardware that was no longer needed after the war, people really began to not only understand and respect the 9mm, but they got very accustomed to it because it was absolutely everywhere after World War II. Before World War II as well, but after World War II, it was literally everywhere. The popularity of 9mm grew to the point where countries that were making clones of handguns chambered in other calibers were actually chambering them in 9mm. This right here is a Spanish Star Model BM. Obviously a 1911 clone. The 1911 was originally chambered in 45 ACP, which is a cartridge that we'll talk about at a later point in time. But this one right here, made by the Spanish police or military, made by the Spanish, is chambered in 9mm just because they saw the pros and cons between 9mm and 45, and they thought that the smaller, more compact nature of the 9mm still packing enough of a punch would be enough for whatever their forces are going to be handling, besides the full-size, very much a larger, heavier situation to deal with than the smaller, more compact 9mm version of the 1911. Anyone who's ever handled a full-size 1911, great, there's a magazine safety in this thing. I got no mags in these just to show clear, and now I can't get the hammer down. Oh well, not the first time I couldn't get a hammer down. But anyone who's dealt with a full-size 1911 knows just how large and cumbersome they can be. And whenever you start chopping down the size of a 45, you start really decreasing the reliability. So if you want to keep the reliability of a design that is proven, like the Spanish did, but you wanted to basically turn it into a way more compact package, then the best way to do that is to swap over to a projectile that is far more accommodating. That's the word I'm looking for. Far more accommodating to the situation that you are presented with. Now, 9mm nowadays, like I said, is still exceptionally popular. This is just one of many, many, many examples of a 9mm handgun. This right here is my Taurus G2C. This is just like a fun little plinking gun. This is the handgun that I use to teach a lot of people on how to shoot with semi-automatics. It's just a good universal do-everything gun. It's been reliable for me so far. It's quite accurate, not a whole lot of money, very, very simple little handguns here. They actually operate on the same tilting barrel locking system that your original 1911s had. It's just a Browning design, but we're not going to go into the designs of the handguns in this video. We're talking about the cartridges itself. I gotta go ahead and remember to stay on topic with that. There is a dramatic amount of 9mm handguns out there just because of the popularity of 9mm. It never died out just because it was so popular after the World Wars, where everybody was using 9mm to try and have some sort of cartridge interchangeability. Besides the United States and the French, I believe. The British were using it, the Germans were using it. The Russians, they were using their Nagant revolvers, so they weren't using 9mm at the time. Yeah, they were using their Nagant revolvers and their Tokarevs. They were using like the 7.62 Tokarev cartridge. 9mm submachine guns back during World War II, just with how simple and easy they were to make. They were extremely popular over there on the battlefields. The submachine guns, 9mm submachine guns, were definitely way more popular than the handguns, just because there were a lot more soldiers that were armed with these submachine guns, as opposed to ones armed with the handguns. 9mm got absolutely all over the place, and it just dramatically grew in popularity. Now, I don't think the 9mm really significantly grew in popularity here in the United States until after the adoption of a 9mm cartridge by the U.S. forces. Whenever the 1911 was still being used by our U.S. forces, the 45 ACP was incredibly popular. However, after the adoption of the Beretta 92 into military surplus and the replacement of the 1911, that 9mm really began to kick off here in the U.S., especially as like modern loadings and whatnot began to push that 9mm to roughly the same ballistic proficiencies. I think that's the word I'm looking for. Ballistic proficiencies as the 45. People were used to the 45 and the power that it offered, and the 9mm was basically an anemic cartridge to these kinds of people. So just modern manufacturing, modern propellants, modern bullets, modern etc. really began to push these 9mm projectiles at speeds, velocities, and they had the mass to really deliver a good amount of force on target. I think that really began to show with the adoption of the 92S here in the US. Not only that, but NATO ended up adopting the 9mm NATO round as well, which is a 9mm Parabellum with like 24 grain or 124 grain projectiles, if memory serves me correctly. For the most part, your military loadings are going to be full metal jackets, with some exceptions depending on the different kinds of forces. You know, there's some forces out there that use things besides full metal jackets, but those are typically not forces that are viewed by the mainstream governments of specific countries just because of regulations of war. 9 times out of 10, actually 99.9999999% of the time, you're going to have militaries running full metal jackets with their 9mm ammunition. However, civilian ownership, we are allowed to have all sorts of different projectiles. So whereas the full metal jacket is an extremely popular projectile for the 9mm, there's also hollow points and soft points. There's expanding rounds. There's rounds that are made to fragment upon impact to prevent overpenetration. There's all sorts of different grains, all sorts of different sizes of these rounds. Just with how popular 9mm is, your most popular cartridges are going to be around 115 grain if you're talking about the full metal jackets, with the exception of the NATO 124 grain. But there are extremely lightweight bullets, there's extremely heavyweight bullets. I saw a 158 grain 9mm projectile from the 90s.
I can't remember what it was. I wish I had an example of it, but I've seen as little as like 100 grain 9mm projectiles. So there are a vast array of different kinds of 9mm projectiles out there. You have ones that fire supersonic, or you could bump it down to subsonic for suppression purposes. They're not very heavy, they're very compact, they're very, very popular, and they can definitely do whatever job it is that you're wanting a handgun to do. Now, handguns are not all that terminally effective in comparison to rifle cartridges. So the difference between some of these different cartridges is like negligible at best. The difference between basically every cartridge traveling underneath 2200 feet per second, so basically all of your pistol caliber cartridges with some very rare exceptions, they're going to be very, very similar in ballistic capabilities and what they actually do to a person. I saw a video by Grand Thumb, who actually was testing 9mm and 45 ACP, and the differences between the two is absolutely negligible at best. Now, if you were to crank the same calibers up, but like stick them in rifle cartridges, that's where you start to see a real dramatic difference in the differences between cartridges. But with handguns, it's just not there, just because the velocities are not there. Perhaps I'll make a whole video talking about the minute nature of just how insignificant it is whenever you're picking different cartridges. Now, of course, there's going to be some difference. The 9mm is by far a more effective round than the 25 ACP, but it's also twice the bullet. The 45 is going to poke a bigger diameter hole in the target than the 9mm, but the 45 is also twice the bullet. However, you're talking such minute differences. I mean, a few millimeters of hole poking capabilities, as opposed to like the internal temporary stretch cavity that just decimates organic tissue from a rifle cartridge. Handgun cartridges just can't stack up. All right, well, I think this was a really good time. I think I covered basically everything that I wanted to cover here. I didn't go too in-depth on the the grains and the velocities of 9mm just because of how popular they are. There are so many different options out there for anybody wanting basically anything whenever it comes to 9mm. If you want a heavy, slow bullet, if you want a fast, light bullet, you can find either one of those in 9mm. If you're looking for a gun that is like antique, then they have them in 9mm. If you're looking for a modern, much more practical gun, they have them in 9mm. If you're looking for collectibles, they have them in 9mm. If you're looking for your favorite gun, but you don't feel like shooting the cartridge that the favorite gun uses, they probably have one in 9mm. I know a lot of people that tell me they want a 1911 for their first gun. I'll take them out and I'll let them use my 1911 and 45, and they're like, wow, that is a serious, serious handgun with a lot of recoil. And I'll be like, well, here, go ahead and try this. It's basically a 1911, but chambered in 9mm. And they'll run it and they'll be like, wow, I really like this in comparison to the 45 1911. But pretty much everything that exists that is popular by any stretch of the imagination, they probably have it in 9mm, with the exception of a good portion of rifles and like military surplus. But like basically all of your modern equipment, they have some sort of chambering in 9mm. Hell, there's 9mm bolt action rifles out there. Hell, I saw a 9mm, what was it, M1 carbine the other day while I was just kind of browsing guns. It was an M1 carbine chambered in 9mm. Actually a really good idea. I might consider getting one myself, just because 9mm is way cheaper and easier to shoot than actual M1 carbine ammunition. Not quite as potent, but 9mm, like I said, is more than adequate. Go ahead and do whatever job it is that you're wanting to do. Alright, well, thanks for watching, folks. I have a whole lot of ammunition to cover, and I doubt the videos for those are going to be as long as this video. 9mm is just so popular, and there's so much to cover, and I didn't want to just leave it in the dust. I didn't want to give it a video that
wasn't worthy of the 9mm cartridge. Now there's several very popular rounds out there that I'm going to cover. They're probably going to be longer-ish videos, but there's some cartridges out there that I'm going to cover that aren't necessarily all that long. I'm going to go ahead and add some sort of hunting application to my cartridges. I'm going to just point out whether or not a cartridge is going to be good for hunting. 9mm I would not recommend using for hunting. You could use it for like small game and whatnot, and for like your smaller medium game, I wouldn't go anything beyond like an 80-pound pig with a 9mm unless your shot placement is really spot on. And I definitely wouldn't run it out of a handgun. I would absolutely run it out of some sort of carbine. There's plenty of 9mm expanding projectiles out there, so you could, in theory, legally speaking, use these for hunting. A lot of places restrict you to at least a 30 caliber cartridge, and these right here are definitely more or larger in diameter than 30 caliber. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why these were made, to be larger than 30 caliber. As a matter of fact, these are 38 caliber approximately. They're just not overly potent, and they're not necessarily ones that I would want to take out hunting. There's way better options out there than hunting with a 9mm. Now, in the event of like an SHTF situation and you have a 9mm, yeah, you absolutely could use that for hunting. I just wouldn't recommend using that as your primary hunting cartridge. Alright folks, I think this is where I'm going to end this video. Thanks for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Description down below has a link to all sorts of different things. Go ahead and go check that out. That being said, hey, I'm probably going to make another video. I'm going to grab something to eat first. You guys go off of yourself a fantastic day. Shout out to GOA. This is my GOA hat, right? If I'm wearing my GOA hat, shout out to GOA and FPC. If I'm not wearing my GOA hat, then still shout out to GOA and FPC. Alright, you guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I gotta pick all this up.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.